Join me today for a deep dive into Chanel Caviar and Chanel Lambskin leather. Hello, welcome back to Classics with a Quirk, where I talk about contemporary and luxury designer items and brands with a touch of silliness. This is the kind of content that you find interesting. Please do like this video and subscribe for more of it. Thank you. I am so ready to bring you today's much requested video, which is Chanel Caviar and Chanel Lambskin, a deep dive into both and then the differences between the two. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, and now that I finally started my little Let's Talk Leather series on my channel, I'll link the playlist for you. There's not a lot on it yet, but I will link it if you're interested. The reasoning behind my wanting to make the Let's Talk Leather little series on my channel, by the way, is because I hear so often people talk about the quality and the craftsmanship and the materials that go into these luxury goods that we all love, but I don't actually see a lot of people talking about why they are such good quality, what actually is the craftsmanship, the real behind the scenes and information about the materials. So I just wanted to share some knowledge with you, and I'm always learning. I'm always looking to continue to learn. So if you have any knowledge that you'd like to share with me, you have any resources you'd love to share with me, please feel free to do so in a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram. I'm currently reading a fascinating book called Leather and Footwear Sustainability. It is such an interesting read. It is a lot to get through, I will say that, but if you are interested in learning more about leathers, I would recommend it. I'll leave a link for it for you below as well. And without any further ado, let's get to talking about Chanel Caviar and Chanel Lambskin leather. So I'm going to be covering a variety of topics for you today. Timestamps will be down below in the event that you want to skip between the chapters. But first, we're going to be talking a little bit about what Chanel Caviar and Chanel Lambskin is, where it's sourced, and what it's made of. So first off, Chanel Caviar, and this is just a little Chanel SLG. It's a Chanel flap card holder, and it's really cute. I unboxed this earlier on my channel. I really like it. This is what it looks like. And this is a REV item. So that means that this is an item that is released every single season. It's not a seasonal piece. And that is something that I do want to make sure that you are aware of, because there is a difference between Chanel classic caviar items, the Chanel REV pieces, such as the classic flaps, and the Chanel seasonal pieces, like the Cocoa Handle or my Sweet Classic Flap or the Business Affinity. So I'm going to be touching on that in a little bit, but first we want to talk about Chanel Caviar, what it is and where it comes from. So Caviar, first of all, is a calfskin leather. It comes from cows, and Chanel sources its calfskin from France, Holland, and Switzerland primarily. Chanel lambskin and sheepskin, on the other hand, are sourced from Spain and New Zealand respectively. And it's not really a surprise to me that Chanel sheepskin is sourced from New Zealand, considering that New Zealand is kind of known for its sheep, but there you are. Once the hides are collected from these animals, they are then sent to tanneries to be vegetable tanned. Now, vegetable tanning is a very expensive, but much more environmentally friendly and much better in general tanning process for the leather itself than chrome tanning. Only about 10% of all leathers in the entire world is tanned with the vegetable tanning process. Most of it is chrome tanned nowadays, but vegetable tanning is in general much better for the environment, it's much better for the leather, and it normally results in elongated longevity for the leather. Vegetable tanning uses water and natural tannins found in plants and particularly in tree bark to tan the leather over a period of many months, usually between 60 to 90 days. Once the hides are tanned, they are often divided into grades: A grade, B grade, C grade, and D grade, A being the best, D grade being the worst. And then they are sent to the dyeing process, split, or otherwise treated to be created into leather items further down the line. A very important thing to note about Chanel leather in general, again, both Caviar and Lambskin, is that these leathers are all full grain leather. Full grain leather is the purest, most robust, and best quality leather that you can really get. It is essentially just the hide with the fur or hair removed and the fats removed, leaving you a very sturdy, very thick, and often very smooth, supple leather, provided that it is treated right. The next category of leather after full grain leather is top grain leather or corrected leather. Corrected leather or top grain leather is full leather that has been sanded down slightly so it does have a more even feel to it. The reason that you sometimes need to have top grain or corrected leather is because not all full grain leather is best quality leather. You have different grades of hides, again, A grade to D grade. And A grade hides are the hides that have the least amount of imperfections. They don't have scar tissue, they don't have lumps and bumps, they have very even, very smooth pores. D grade full grain leather is still very thick, hardy leather, but it is more likely to have imperfections, having scars, having nicks, having dings. So it is much more likely to need to be turned into top grain or sanded leather. So you have A and B full grain leather that has the least amount of imperfections possible, and C and D full grain leather has more imperfections to it. On that note, Chanel Caviar is an artificial grain leather. A machine is utilized in order to press that artificial grain, the caviar pebbles, onto the full grain leather to get that more pebbly look. It is not a natural grain leather. I go into a little bit more detail about pebbled leathers in my other video, which I will link for you, but just for this particular video, base process is Chanel Caviar leather is an artificial grain that uses a machine to be pressed onto full grain leather. On the other hand, Chanel Lambskin leather is a smooth full grain leather. It has not been treated in any way besides the tanning and dyeing process, so you're getting not only the purest form of leather, but in order for it to look good and not have imperfections, Chanel Lambskin is the best, highest quality, A-grade full grain hides. So now that we know about where Chanel Caviar and Chanel Lambskin come from, what it's made of, and how it is processed, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the details of these leathers. And in order to do that, I'm going to give you some visual aids using my handy dandy jeweler's loop. This little jeweler's loop is a standard 10 times magnification jeweler's loop that allows me to look at the details up close of these leathers. And if you're interested in leathers, I would recommend getting one. I will link this jeweler's loop for you down below in my description box, but I would recommend it if you're interested in looking a little bit closer at the details of how these leathers are created. So first we're going to be talking about Chanel REV Caviar. Again, this is the caviar that the classic flaps are made of, as well as the classic pieces like the Chanel wallet on chain in the classic black and the Chanel flat card holder in the classic black. These are both REV Caviar pieces. They are made every season, and they are made with the same caviar techniques that the Chanel classic flaps use. These techniques and the leather chosen for the classic REV pieces are different from the seasonal pieces and styles. So over here, you're going to be seeing an up-close picture of my Chanel Caviar wallet on chain. And as you can see from the pictures, again, this is an embossed leather with an artificial grain, but you can still see underneath the pebbling that there are still little bumps and ridges that come from it being embossed on top of a full grain leather hide. You're able to still see some of the pores in the leather, and of note, with the REV pieces, you're able to see a different type of pebbling. You're going to be seeing a much more raised pebble. This does differ from season to season because, of course, Chanel hides differ from season to season, but in general, Chanel REV Caviar is embossed onto the leather using a different process and a different mold than Chanel's seasonal colors and caviars are. As you can see from both the pictures I'm showing you on the screen right now, the Chanel Walk and the Chanel card holder both have approximately the same type of caviar. They look pretty much the same. This is because they are both REV pieces and use the same embossing process. In contrast now to the REV Caviar, I'm going to show you some up-close shots of my Chanel 20p flap card holder in the Camellia style and the Camellia embossing. This item came out in the Spring Summer Act 1 2020 collection, and if you'll notice from the pictures, the caviar is much flatter, much less raised, and much smoother than the REV piece. In fact, it kind of looks as though it was barely stamped at all. It's a very, very faint embossing. This might be because it is a Camellia embossed piece and they didn't want raised, more granule, bumpy caviar to detract from the embossing of the Camellia print itself. Another example of a flatter type of caviar embossing in contrast to the REV Caviar is the soft caviar in my Sweet Classic flap. This was a seasonal style from 21p. As you can see from the up-close pictures, this caviar does not have as much of a texture as the REV Caviar does. However, you still can see the pores underneath the caviar. It's just, again, a lot flatter and much more soft looking. I will say that in person, it is also softer to the touch. The REV pieces have much more of a granular texture than my Sweet Classic flap. A really quick aside I do want to mention talking about caviar seasonal bags versus REV bags is that seasonal bags also do use lesser quality full grain hides. Now they do all use full grain leather, and that is again the best quality hide possible, but caviar seasonal bags can use lesser quality full grain. We're talking about like B grade as opposed to A grade, because the embossing can hide the flaws that a smooth leather like a lambskin can't hide. So if you have a lesser quality, and I say lesser quality, but we're still talking about top quality pieces, you have a lesser quality hide in comparison to almost perfection, you have slightly less almost perfection, you have those hides, the B grade hides, going to seasonal caviar pieces because the embossing can hide some of the imperfections. That sometimes while you see certain seasonal pieces like cocoa handles with very thick, small, very stiff, pebbly grains of leather, that particular type of caviar embossing is used to sometimes camouflage imperfections in a hide. It doesn't mean the bag is made of low quality leather, but it does mean it might be trying to hide some imperfections. Now I'm going to show you some lambskin examples, and this is going to be a really interesting exercise in looking at how lambskin ages in patinas, because it does age in patina differently than caviar does, because it isn't embossed, it's a fully natural leather. First, I'm going to show you my flat card holder. This is brand new from the boutique and only just recently unboxed, so it has not really been touched, hasn't been broken in at all, and really hasn't had a chance to supple up. It still does feel quite robust and durable. As you can see just from the screen, this item has quite a lot of reflection to it, and from the pictures you can see that it is quite smooth. You can see pores, you can see dapples and dips, but there is no added texture. It is just smooth, beautiful lambskin. Moving from brand new lambskin to vintage lambskin, this piece is from between 1989 to 1991, and judging from the serial code, I would suspect 1990 or 1991. It is a beautifully aged piece that has a gorgeous patina. It's incredibly shiny. You can see that they're both shiny, but this one definitely has more of a light reflection to it. And as you can see from the jeweler's loop, this lambskin, over 30-year-old lambskin, also has pores and ripples and textures to it, but the pores are very, very small and the lambskin is still incredibly smooth and shiny. Putting both examples of the lambskin on the screen now, the card holder and the vintage lambskin, you can see again how smooth this lambskin is. Even under magnification, you have pores, but the pores themselves are so small and there are no imperfections in the skin at all. This is again because it comes from a full grain, top quality, smooth leather hide. Now for the ultimate comparison, lambskin versus caviar. And we're going to be talking about modern lambskin versus modern caviar in this portion of the video. So first off, I'm going to pop some pictures up on the screen here. We're going to be looking at REV caviar and REV lambskin. The classic caviar that the classic flaps are made of, and the classic lambskin that the classic lambskin pieces are made of. As we've discussed, both are beautiful, top quality leathers, but they do have some key differences. First of all, obviously, the lambskin is untreated natural leather, while the caviar is embossed leather. It is got an artificial grain put on top of it. It means that initially, caviar is thought of, for a very good reason, to be the more durable leather. I see all the time on YouTube people talking about how you can scratch your fingers over caviar and it won't do anything to it. You can take caviar out in the rain and it won't do anything to it. Caviar is an incredibly robust, durable leather, and that is true to a point. The thing about caviar is that the embossing process essentially provides an additional layer of protection on top of the full grain leather. The artificial embossing creates these raised bumps, and those raised bumps essentially offer protection against scratches. The thing is, though, is that these raised bumps, the caviar granules themselves, can be scraped off, and once those are scraped off, they cannot be replaced. The caviar can't really be re-embossed. So once these caviar granules are scraped off, in the event that they are, the only thing you can do is kind of color in the leather and try to match the color. Not so hard if it's black, much more difficult if it's a different color. And scraping off a caviar grain really, really weakens the integrity and structure of the leather in that spot. So once that caviar grain is scraped away or lifted, underneath that grain is much more vulnerable and susceptible to more damage. Meanwhile, lambskin leather is, yes, much more receptive to surface scratches, and neither leather is going to do very well. If you take a deep gouge into it, that's going to damage both irreparably. But lambskin leather does have much more of a predilection to be scratched on the surface over caviar, which, you know, if you take caviar, you can run your fingernails over it. It's probably going to be fine. I wouldn't suggest gouging into it again, but you can do that. Lambskin leather, I wouldn't do that, but if you do have a surface scratch on lambskin leather, you can buff it out. Now, I've seen people talk about how the buffing out is ridiculous and doesn't actually work, and people who talk about the buffing works very well. It depends a little on the lambskin itself and how deep the scratch is. A deep gouge probably won't be able to be buffed out. The deeper the scratch, the more the leather is damaged and it won't be able to be buffed out. But a surface scratch on lambskin is often able to be buffed out using just the oils in your fingers. You just rub it gently, and you do have to rub it for more than a couple of seconds. It does sometimes take 30 seconds to actually a couple of minutes in order to properly buff out a scratch on lambskin leather. So sometimes people who try to buff out just don't do it for long enough. You do have to actually really rub your finger over it, rub your oils in your hands over it to properly buff the leather out and to smooth it over. But it is more likely to have a chance at being repaired in the way that a lifted caviar grain can't be at all. In terms of weatherproofing and taking your bag bag out in the rain, yes, Caviar leather is a little bit more weather resistant, again because of the raised Caviar granules. The added heat and the pressure that has raised the Caviar and the embossing does protect it from wetness in some capacity. Water does slide off a little bit more easily, but they are not waterproof. They are water resistant. There's a very big difference. If you get your Caviar bag soaked or caught in a downpour, the chances of it bubbling is not insignificant. Like, you can damage a Caviar bag. If you get it wet and you immediately wipe it off, much less likely to cause damage in a different way than lambskin, but try not to drench your Chanel bag regardless of whether or not it's Caviar or lambskin. Just try to keep it out of the rain if you can. In terms of lambskin though, lambskin is more likely to get water spots and water damage to it. If you get a lambskin bag wet and you wipe it off immediately, the chances of the bag drying out are not insignificant. It is possible that it will. Leather is robust and it is made of skin. Skin does dry out. In fact, that's why a lot of people suggest if you have Louis Vuitton untreated Vachetta leather, if you get a water droplet on it, you just wipe the entire thing over with a damp cloth very fast, and that will let the entire thing get wet and then dry, so a water damaged spot won't stay or stick or look as out of place because it will have been blended in sort of with the rest of the Vachetta leather. Lambskin leather is kind of like that too. Again, if you get a few drops of water on your bag, don't dunk it, obviously, like don't do that. But you can very gently rub it out with your fingers, not pressing in, just very gently rubbing it out, buffing it out, and then leave it to dry. And chances are your leather will dry. I can't guarantee that it won't bubble or color change, especially on a light colored bag like a pink or a beige clair. But again, if you do leave the leather to air out and dry naturally, chances are it will. So we've talked about scratches and we've talked about water resistance. Now what about longevity? Well, as you might guess, Caviar is much more likely to keep its shape over time and retain its structure. Caviar by nature is a much more structured leather because it has been embossed with a coating that has added a thickness to it in a way that lambskin has not been treated. Over time, the Caviar will most likely develop a very nice shiny patina, and that is in part because it has been vegetable tanned. Vegetable tanned leather is much more likely to develop a patina over chrome tanned leather. But that's just a little aside. The bottom line is yes, you're going to get a very shiny, nice Caviar that will retain its structure if it's stored properly and stuffed properly. I did make a video on how not to store your Chanel bags, and I would recommend giving that video a look if you're interested in trying to keep the structural integrity of your Chanel items, as well as making sure that they don't get dents or nicks or dings or dents in the leather. I would recommend looking at that video. But in general, if you store your bags correctly, Caviar or lambskin, they are going to retain their structure fairly nicely. That being said, lambskin is a softer leather and it is much more likely to supple over time and lose its shape in a way that Caviar is less inclined to do. However, as I said, if you store your lambskin bags properly, you're much less likely to experience shape or structure loss. The really big difference between how lambskin ages over Caviar is the patina and the scratches. As we talked about before, if you scratch the grains off of a Caviar bag, it cannot be repaired, and the structural integrity of the bag itself is then quite weakened because you've had a layer of the bag ripped off essentially. With lambskin leathers, even if you get scratches in the bag, as long as the scratches don't pierce underneath the lambskin, the integrity of the bag itself has not been compromised. So a lambskin bag with scratches that have not pierced beneath the skin is still a very structurally sound bag. And of course, the feel and the patina that lambskin develops over time is what Chanel enthusiasts really love the most. You will hear so many people waxing poetic, myself included, on the buttery soft feel of the lambskin, and that is very true. You have a thick, beautiful, full grain, smooth leather that has very little pore, very little alternate texture, so it is just smooth and supple and buttery, and that is absolutely gorgeous. If you're looking for a daily bag, Caviar is an excellent option, and if you're looking for a bigger bag, Caviar is a good choice. Caviar bags that are bigger are, again, less likely to experience structure loss because the leather itself is stiffer, whereas bigger lambskin bags are more likely to experience sag. That being said, if you're looking for a beautiful special occasions bag or a smaller bag, I don't think you can go wrong with lambskin. You might want to be a little bit more careful with the bag itself, but lambskin, again, is a beautiful, supple, gorgeous leather, and of all the leathers that Chanel does, I would definitely say it is the most luxurious. And there you have it, a little bit of an overview between two of Chanel's arguably most famous leathers, Chanel Caviar and Chanel Lambskin, some intricacies of both and some differences between the two. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this video. If there's something that you think that I could have gone into more detail on, or if there's something that you learned that you want to share with me, I would love to hear about it. Are you Team Caviar or Team Lambskin? Please leave your comments and thoughts down below. And I do hope that you enjoyed this video. Please stay tuned for more videos in this Let's Talk Leather series, as I'm so excited to continue these topics. If you have an idea or a suggestion of something you'd like me to talk about, please feel free to leave a comment down below as well. If you like this video, please do give it a like. It super duper helps the algorithm and I'd really appreciate it, and subscribe for more content that helps the algorithm even more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.